Hello dear friends, today we have July 18, Friday. This I mean in Washington. Now is a late night, about 22 hours and 24 minutes. Well, you dear viewers, most of you will see this video already. Early in the morning on Saturday, the reason that woke me up at such a late hour to turn to you with this video is enough important for my main audience. Therefore, I decided to do it at such a late hour. We assumed that these 50 days that Trump took away from Putin, after which promised to introduce tough sanctions if Putin does not go to the truce. So we assumed that during these 50 days the United States administration will not just sit with folded arms, but will supply weapons and develop a comprehensive plan to regulate the situation in Ukraine. Minimum is the declaration of truce, maximum is some kind of contours of a peace treaty. We discussed some possible elements of this plan in the previous video, according to the proposals of some leading experts of the U.S. National Security Council. But today, suddenly, a material appears in which it is confirmed that yes, in the core of the administration, namely in the Central Intelligence Department, a quite logical plan of comprehensive regulation in Ukraine is being developed, not only the announcement of the truce, but also the achievement of peace. We will learn this from the material that Seymour Hersh wrote. I once told you about him. Those who have been watching my programs for a long time maybe remember there was a moment when this gentleman Seymour Hersh made a lot of noise. Published an article according to which Northern Stream 2 and 1, in my opinion, there is one branch, were blown up, no more, no less, as the Special Forces GUR. And then I refuted this material, and not only me, but also a number of other foreign journalists. And then there were questions about Mr. Herschel's intelligence. What do I want to tell them? This is a mastodon of American investigative journalism. He is already over 80, but in a healthy mind and an absolutely healthy physical person. This is a legend that has colossal connections in any administration, regardless of whether it is a Democrat or a Republican. He has connections in the so-called deep state, in the depths of the state, and especially in such his units as the Special Services and especially the Central Intelligence Department. When he spoke and wrote about the fact that the Ukrainian Special Services blew up the Surge Strip, it doesn't mean that he was poorly informed or that he was misinformed. It means that it was necessary to blame someone for this explosion. Russia shouldn't have done this because it was the owner of these gas pipelines. It's not good for Europeans either, but it shouldn't have been for America. Therefore, regardless of, I think, mutual understanding with the Central Intelligence Department, with other structures of the American government, Mr. Hersh wrote a fairly substantial article. Personally, he would not describe all this in person if he was not told, as I suppose, by a real specialist in this sphere. In short, this is a force that has the largest, but it is difficult to find a journalist here who has such huge connections with the intelligence community of the United States. Perhaps even Bill Gertz was such. I don't know if he writes now or not in the Washington Times. So this article was written by Seymour Hersh as a result of his conversations with representatives, as I understand it, of the CIA, as he calls it here. But then he says just informed people in the administration. I have a friend who knows Mr. Hersh for decades, probably years, in good relations with him. I asked their opinion. I believe in their opinion endlessly. And everyone disagrees with the opinion that this person, that is, he can be criticized, they do not agree, they do it more often in a political sense. But to think that he has come up with something somewhere or works, let's say, on some political force. That is, yes, he can work at some deep state agency, consciously or unconsciously, but to work, let's say, on Democrats against Republicans or vice versa is practically impossible. The man respects himself too much. So he wrote this article where he laid out the plan that is now being developed in the administration on the issue of how to achieve peace in Ukraine. Moreover, not in some 10 years, but now quickly within a few months. Well, and here, if you remember, we have repeatedly discussed in the past that the war, Ukraine, the Ukrainian people by and large, leads to two fronts, one external and one internal. So it turned out that the heart of this plan, which Mr. Hersh writes about, to a large extent affects this second, internal front. That is, this is not only a decision to stop the war and a conclusion of some kind of peaceful agreement, but these are also deep changes inside the country, i.e. on the internal front. Well, come on, I counted that you need to know this. The sooner, the better. Moreover, Saturday and Sunday there will be a lot of time to discuss these issues. I invite you to discuss, right? And now we turn to the essence of the plan. But all this is exposed in a document that could well be a good analytical document of the intelligence service of any Western country. So Hersh recalls that in the fall of 1923, Valery Zaluzhny said in an interview to The Economist magazine that the war with Russia came to a standstill. Literally 3 months later, he was fired. Then, as Hersh writes, the general, who is the most popular public figure in Ukraine, was appointed ambassador in London and is doing fine with his duties, although he behaves quite restrained. Zaluzhny is now considered the most likely successor to Zelensky. Information sources in Washington told me that this position could become his for several months. Zelensky is included in the short list of persons who are subject to expulsion if President Trump makes such a decision. If Zelensky refuses to leave his post, which is quite likely, then, according to one American official, he will be removed by force. So the ball is on his field. He has to make a decision. I don't think that when they say remove by force here, I don't think they mean something in the style of Putin's autocracy, murder, poisoning, and so on. I just mean to create some kind of situation, or make such an offer that he will not be able to refuse and will resign, let's say so. Next, Hersh continues, many in Washington and Ukraine believe that the escalation of the air war with Russia will soon end, while there is still a chance to agree with President Putin. There are signs that Zelensky is waiting and understands what will happen to him. He has just replaced or fired 3 high-ranking officials, Prime Minister, Defense Minister, and Ambassador to the United States. As one American official told me, Zelensky begins to understand the danger of politics, most likely, and the danger of position taken by them. What will happen next, added the official, from the point of view of political violence in Kiev and other parts of Ukraine, depends largely on how much the people have reached the point where he will have no other choice. In short, as I understand this passage, how the whole change will pass quickly, painlessly. Without all kinds of civil wars, clashes, some groups of the population with others, it all depends on how tired the people are of the current situation and from the war, and from what is happening inside the state as a result of the rule of a group of people who are now in power. And I understand how many people inside Ukraine who are concerned with the internal front, because I am being written a lot on this issue. The word dictatorship, authoritarianism, is very common, and very often they are also found in the foreign media. Zelensky believes that in a deep state of the United States it is unlikely to leave voluntarily and only forwardly. A strong phrase, right? This is the internal discussion in the United States. There are two camps there. The smart side says that let the Ukrainians figure it out themselves and do not attract the CIA to solve the issue. So far, this common sense defines politics. Thank God, hopefully it will continue to be so. But some, he does not call them, political figures and high-ranking representatives of the security circles of the United States, they are impatient. They do not want to wait, because if you give it all according to the procedure, there are probably elections. Here they are hinting at elections. Then it will take more than 50 days. And the minority of impatient pragmatists think that it should be done as quickly as possible. I don't know how Trump looks at all this, Hersh writes. The president publicly overstepped his position in relation to Russia, stating that Putin deceived many, including former presidents of the United States, but only not me. That is, Trump refuses to be and look like a fool whom Putin has led around the finger. Therefore, he cannot continue to play tricks on how he has been doing this for a long time. He used this card, he used this opportunity. Therefore, he stated that more American weapons would be sent to Ukraine, which would increase his ability to strike deep into Russia. Many Russian commentators and analysts doubt whether Trump really changed the course and is fully committed to the support of Ukraine. But they tell me here in the administration that Trump is really annoyed with Zelensky for his decision. Last winter to put on his usual combat uniform for a state visit to Washington, which turned out to be a failure. Trump described him, Zelensky, as a person who came to the White House in a pajama. Well, what can I say, everyone? Measures their own criteria, and by the way, the criteria that a person determines his attitude to various people or phenomena, they characterize him and, first of all, him. But as they say, there are realities with which you have to reconcile or consider. There is such an old saying that a stranger does not go to a monastery with his staff. If you know that something is not accepted there, then you probably don't have to do it. I told you about the great American ambassador Benjamin Franklin, who made the opportunity to win. He financed the war for the independence of the United States in America at the expense of France. There would be no victory for him, maybe there would be no such thing, so he taught these conditions of diplomacy. If you know that Trump, who even on a 35-degree heat a week ago was the final, the World Cup of the best teams was. Held for the first time, the sun was burning and Trump came there in a dark suit with buttons all over. Therefore, he has some kind of label, and it is probably what he called a pajama, and apparently a red rag acted on him, but I think this is not the problem. The problem is different. He psychologically does not perceive Zelensky, does not accept him. He is for him, as it were, an irritant. Is it good or bad? This is the 10th question. We need to solve the practical issue with the United States now. Get support, get political, diplomatic, get weapons, and with their help, get more money for which this weapon will be bought. A lot of questions, therefore, what else to say? The brains should be at the end of the day. Hersh further writes, I was provided with new data on the losses of Russia, received on the basis of the carefully weighed estimates of the intelligence services of the United States and Great Britain. That is, they showed him, and this is not the first time when confidential documents of American intelligence services are shown to him. So these documents show that since the beginning of the war with Putin, at the beginning of 1922, Russia has suffered losses of 2 million people, gentlemen. Almost twice as much as it is officially reported. Putin is not afraid to lose power, said the author, one American official, but he is losing popularity. And Trump is the main supplier of help to Zelensky, and the only one who can continue the war in Ukraine. Who has real power? This is not Zelensky, the author writes, because his only support is the United States of America. Here I made a remark, now I will explain so that the situation is clear. That is, the author of this plan, and this first of all is the CIA, reports to Trump that he is the only person who can continue the war in Ukraine, and it is not needed. Putin does not need it. Given the losses that he is carrying, there will be more of this. That is, Trump can continue this war and can stop it. And this is his message to Putin, who needs to stop the war as quickly as possible, but at the same time not to lose face. Here is such a gentleman, a delicate situation, one might say. That is, Trump was created like candy, a map. He likes to talk, you know, yes. Who has a map, who does not, so he was created what he considers a goat. He was given a map that he can play in such a way that Putin will end the war, and at the same time not to lose face. Therefore, they used to say that Trump depends on Putin in that sense, in this sense, and so on. And now the authors of this plan ask the question that Putin, in large part, and Putin's political regime can depend on Trump if Trump wants to play this card. As I was told, and I continue the text of the author, Washington believes that the losses of Russia are a key factor in starting serious negotiations on the end of the war. That is, not just about the truce, but about the end of the war. Here is the strategic plan. Do you remember what I said? Well, they will come, now the plan still exists to achieve it. All the struggle is about declaring a truce. Well, they came and sat down for negotiations, and the Russians again pushed their crazy demands. That's it, it's over. That is, there is still no strategic plan how to regulate all this. There is how to declare neutrality. It's like on the 25th floor. Come to the apartment, to the open window, look there, and what's next? Where to go? This plan opens the perspective and the final solution of the issue. So, what is the basis of this? What gives the possibility of this terrible loss of Russia in this war? These are the losses that were inflicted by the Soviet Union, and this gives the opportunity to start serious negotiations on the end of the war, writes the author. But Zelensky is on the way. And to do this, to solve this program, to conduct serious negotiations on the end of the war, it is necessary to change the leadership in Ukraine, taking into account the contempt of Putin for Zelensky and the possibility of further escalation of the conflict. Once again, this is my remark. The most important thing is what the Kremlin incites to negotiations on peace. These are the losses that the Russian armed forces suffered from the OSCE, but Putin stops these negotiations and signing what he thinks is below his dignity to sign this agreement with Zelensky or some other representative of this. Although he said that maybe with Speaker of the Verkhovna Rada, but not with Zelensky. Well, here again, we should take care of him. We should not worry about Putin, about the face of his face. Although, on the other hand, if you completely ignore it and somehow do not solve this issue in one way or another, then the issue becomes completely indecisive and the war becomes endless, until the last Russian or Russian, until the last Ukrainian, because Putin, for him, the face of his face is important. For a pale mole, her physiognomy is important. You see, the paradox of a terrible situation that borders on idiocy, but this is the reality of this world in the 21st century. Next, he describes losses. Losses are interesting figures, but when he talks about 2 million, he uses it twice. The text, that is, these are numbers that can be considered real, what he heard and recorded. When he writes about losses per month, then there is an unreality that does not agree with 2 million. God forbid, because Putin, yes, the author says earlier, in the autumn of last year, the losses were on a record low level. Since Putin was waiting for the results of the elections in the United States of America and therefore did not take active offensive actions, they were waiting for Trump to win, then the LAFA will begin. We will not have to bear great losses. Trump will help us to win. And when Trump won, the Russian leadership organized a spring offensive to capture as many territories as possible before the beginning of the next round of expected peaceful negotiations with Ukraine, but the results were solid. The Russian offensive advanced only 120 miles beyond the territory already controlled by Russia in Ukraine. This success achieved with great losses had minimal significance. As they said, this is all agricultural land. There are no fortified cities or important communication facilities. And now the total loss of Russians in Ukraine has reached 2 million people. The most terrible thing, as sources emphasize to him, is that all the best soldiers of the regular army of Russia, they all go into these 2 million. They are not. They are all destroyed. And now they are replaced by ill-mannered peasants. All the best officers of the middle line, sergeants, staff, they are all dead. All modern armored vehicles and vans are in ruins. This cannot continue, according to the intelligence community of the United States of America. The American official continued. After the failure of the attack, Putin switched to the strategy of the London Blitzkrieg. Do you remember what I mean? This is also called the Battle for Britain, when after the capture of France, the Germans began to base air raids on Great Britain. The British bombed more aircraft in the Luftwaffe than their own. Great Britain won this battle. He says that Great Britain, led by Winston Churchill, held out, but with Kiev, led by Zelensky, the situation is not so positive, but I must say that only Luftwaffe was bombed, British cities then. Britain was not bombed, that is, they were not Shelled by supersonic missiles, cruise missiles, another situation really. Ukrainians are now suffering losses that are, in principle, tolerable, but what they have left in reserve is mainly previously liberated from the call of the executioner, recently forcibly dragged into the army, again said one of the officials. That is, this is the situation. In Russia, these are terrible losses and there is no hope for improvement, because those who come do not even have time for their training, for their preparation. All this is really in the full sense of the word meat, which is being mined and how much it can continue. I told you about the speech, which I would call Hebel's speech, which was pronounced on the Solovino monument this week. The speech was about the fact that we already have nowhere in the villages to recruit anyone to war with Ukraine, because everyone was taken and everyone was already killed. We stopped before the need to shave into the army in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and this is a catastrophe for the regime. That is, the question has arisen. Now, will some in Europe decisively reject the change of leadership of Ukraine? This question was asked by Hersh, his interlocutor. In response, the American official predicted to him that no one in Europe would sacrifice their lives in nature for a comfortable city. And the weekend in Paris, in order to support Zelensky, the Europeans will agree to everything. He finished. This is the situation, gentlemen. Once again, in summary, what do we have? The real losses of Russia are so monstrous that Putin really needs to end the world, although he is trying to play with his face. But he cannot do this and end the world because he believes that he cannot sign the world with Zelensky under his dignity. He considers this humiliating to him. The question is, how long can the war continue to solve the issue of the ambitions of two people, Putin and Zelensky? According to Hersh, the Tsar believes that Putin will agree to sign a contract with the hostage. First of all, he is a serious general. The Kremlin probably understands that now, with the Kremlin cadet Siersky, the real commander is Zelensky, who is completely unprofessional and incompetent in this matter, and his deputy, and there can be a more operational leadership by the armed forces when Dnieper Zelensky is carried out by Termak. That is, this is a monstrous situation, just monstrous. Here they still remember, they know how the Kursk operation began, where they were introduced. I told them in my time. 70% of all the best Western technology was thrown there, and it was done in the front line on the Donbass. They were the main ones, that's where the enemy was rushing forward. All this was thrown into the Kursk region, and there it was mostly well received and ground. Thank God that during the same time the situation changed when armored vehicles began to play a less important role. Then drones and all the new inventions related to the use of drones and artificial intelligence. So both sides very much need, the conclusion of the world. By the way, here Hersh does not analyze the economic situation. The economic situation in Russia, which even the senior leaders of the economic bloc say, well, they say indiscriminately. But in fact, from their statements, it should be noted that the situation is practically critical by and large, and there is no hope in Prabazovsky. So Tsiro believes that if Zelensky is replaced by Zaluzhny, then Putin can sign peace. It must be said that recently there have been contacts. Well, first of all, Trump Trump has a confidant, so to speak, a trusted person, one of his close friends. This is Radcliffe, the current director of ЦРУ, whom Trump trusts. He is not a professional in spying, but he had enough mind, unlike other people, like the new Minister of Defense, who carried out a monstrous cleaning in his office. He had enough mind, but not in a cruel way, let's say not with an axe, not with a knife, but with a scalpel, so to speak, according to all sorts of abbreviations. Therefore, I suspect that these thoughts are somewhere related to what the Americans heard from the Kremlin. The conclusion of the Hersh article, as I understood it, is that Zelensky is the most serious obstacle on the way to peace. Under Zelensky, of course, all this so-called OPA is meant, led by Yermak. The latter, by the way, in the last month or so, received 2 black marks. This is an article, in my opinion, either in Politica or in Delibes Politica, in my opinion, and an article in The Economist. According to these articles, there are 2 shots, 2 duplets of completely different continents, completely different publications. The idea was the same. This person with his raids, cavalry raids or cowboy raids in Washington, he does more harm to Ukraine than good. Including the issue of the supply of weapons. That is, a person arrives without any specific purpose, without a day off, comes to the office, carries it to the locals. It is not clear why he came and what he is talking about. He is sometimes exposed, he sits at the door, and when asked why he was sitting, he says, "I am preparing to sit here for the sake of Ukraine as much as I want." He does not even understand that what he is doing is not for the sake of Ukraine, it is harmful. In short, it sounded loud twice so that it would be clear, even to remove it. Remove it at least from the Ukrainian-American relations. That is, of course, when it comes to the fact that Zelensky should be changed. I mean this, and in fact, the whole opus. There is logic here, gentlemen, how I see it all. I can completely agree with what I know about the situation in Washington. That this plan is really being developed in these 50 days, and apparently decisions will be made on it. And as they say in the text, some think that, well, probably, if there are elections and so on, it can take more time. Although there are those who want to solve this before the course of 50 days. And it must be said that given the internal political situation in the USA now, for Trump this may be quite the case. Because this is a unique administration in the sense that it does not have time to get out of the scandal. This is one scandal and does not have time to end as another scandal begins, and the shaking beep, the administration deeper and deeper. Now there is literally a scandal on the same spot. They created it themselves. This is a scandal with the list of Epstein, this beep, perhaps other materials of this Epstein. That is, Trump under pressure. They tried to hide this, and the prosecutor general, apparently according to Trump's instructions. And Trump himself said that nothing, do not do this nonsense. Now he is forced to give instructions to publish it, but will it be published or not, and all or not? That is, the core of the voter who led Trump to victory turned out to be split on the basis of this. This is the so-called magician. And then with health, whether there really are serious problems, whether they came up with this problem in order to draw attention to an unfavorable object. I have the impression that he has no time to do business, he has no time to manage the state, because he continues to manage all these things that he says are hoaxes. That is, all this is fiction, this is a fake. But none of these fakes fell on him as much as on the innocent. Recalling this phrase, "I'm innocent," he came to me himself. This is a permanent crisis, he needs to get out of it, and for this situation is the solution to the issue in Ukraine. And well, it would seem, who could now, have you heard, dear friends, recently? That someone has clearly outlined somewhere at least some permanent plan, how to get out, not to the end of the fire, but to the signing of the world in principle, I did not hear. This is the first plan that I read, I see, and from my point of view, given the reality here in Washington, it makes sense. Could the CIA develop this plan or develop this plan? Well, as I said, it is under the control of Radcliffe, who is infinitely loyal to Trump. Thank God, Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence in the United States, has nothing to do with the operation of the CIA. Well, in order for you to understand who Tulsi Gabbard is in this position, imagine a deputant without a corner in the position of the chairman of the SBU. This is about the same, although not quite the same. Without a corner, I think it would be better to cope with his business. She continues to do everything possible to destroy or paralyze the work. Now she is hunting for witches in the entire intelligence community, looking for people who are not loyal to Trump. This would be the end of her political career as Senator McCartney. That is, yes, Radcliffe saved the Tsar not with an axe and a knife, but with a scalpel, according to the required. Abbreviations, the bone of the deep state in the Tsar, apparently, has been preserved. That is, they are quite capable of developing and proposing this plan. Moreover, it should be understood that this will not be a plan, so to speak, presented as a plan of peaceful regulation. It will be presented to Trump as Mr. President. We have developed a plan how to get rid of this internal problem. Just completely replace the information background on which you are working now. Completely change the agenda. And here, yesterday, you were still plunged, were fighting back from all these unification from all sides, and here you rise and become a hero who did what really no one could do to achieve peace in Ukraine. Here is such a bold plan, and this is how it will be handed over and reported to Trump. Well, I understand what situation he is in and in general his character, the option that he will spit on him, I think it is quite high, but in the same way he agreed to the plan to strike on the nuclear objects of Iran. As it has now become known from the report, the basic report of the American intelligence, there are two objects, and one of the main objects, no harm was done to the nuclear program of Iran. The people were really hurt there, but two others who were deeper, they almost did not suffer. That is, the program was really postponed for several months, unlike what Trump immediately reported. But the main thing is that he was taught this way. This is what you need from the point of view of an ultra-political agenda. Now they will do the same to him, so the chances are very high, and given the fact that it was postponed. I think that in this situation, if it is presented to Trump like this, he will not feel for a long time the torments of conscience about Zelensky, how bad they will do to him. I mean that many people think, I read somewhere in the telegrams, that the Russians were worried and believe that this is not a working plan, like how many months are needed according to the procedure. What procedure, gentlemen? Do you remember Yeltsin's procedure? I'm tired, I'm leaving. That's the whole procedure. Zelensky, excuse me, I served as much as I could. I gave away all my health. Urgent treatment is required, a critical situation. Unfortunately, I must leave the post. Excuse me, dear friends, compatriots, but I will always be with you, wherever I may be. Here is the second, the third. It was me who achieved these terrible blows that the Russian armed forces suffered. Not 1 million, but 2 million losses. This is under my leadership, and I led to the fact that Putin is now forced to go to negotiations. He says that he is not ready to sign with me because he is ashamed to sign a peace treaty with a person who has actually been defeated. But for the sake of the interest of the country, I am ready to put an end to pride and leave. And such options, procedures of leaving Zelensky, even if subtracted. This is, so to speak, as the American policemen say, who detain a person suspected of a crime, and they immediately say to him, we can do it easy or we can do it hard. That is, we can do it quietly, calmly, and easily, or we can do it harshly. Well, harsh options, options are endless. That is, you can always find a normal, mutually acceptable option, an offer that Zelensky will not be able to refuse. Here is the situation, the contours of the plan we are now presenting to ourselves. I think that there are no alternative plans in the State Department. The State Department has no time to deal with this. All the people who were engaged in planning major foreign policy operations, they were all fired, put in jail, or even on vacations, or there were put in jail people who have no idea what it is. This is done by a close, spiritual, and in life, Trump's person Radcliffe. Therefore, we will observe how it will go on. And by the way, I remember maybe a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, speaking publicly somewhere, Zelensky said, if the question arises that for the sake of the interests of the state, for the sake of the interests of Ukraine, I should leave, then I will leave. Well, that's the question. The question has been solved. Therefore, I do not think that the guys here in the CIA express concern that this change may lead to some kind of crisis situation and, God forbid, a civil war. There will be no civil war, I mean in Ukraine. The people have already suffered so much that they will not fight each other for anyone else, for whom, for God's sake. Now the country needs a real leader, a strong hand, a person who uses real respect in the broad areas of the population. Therefore, we will observe, dear friends, write what you think about this. As always, glory to Ukraine and the armed forces. The enemy will be defeated. It is already cracking, gentlemen, it is already cracking 2 million. The enemy will be broken and victory will be ours. To you, dear friends, endurance, courage, and firm faith in our inevitable victory. See you soon.